auctioned off her wedding ring to pay his debts. A Lakota chief replaced it with his own. The auctioneer's voice carried all the way to the edge of the yard where I was standing, and I heard the number. $3.50. And I knew what it was before I turned around to look. I turned anyway. She was standing at the edge of the porch steps, with her arms folded across her chest and her chin up, watching the man hold the ring between his thumb and forefinger like it was a dead thing. A small gold band, plain. Her first husband's. I'd been told, though no one had told me much about him. Just that he died of a chest wound 3 years before I rode into Cutter's Fork, and that she'd kept the ring on a cord around her neck ever since. Not on her finger, just near her heart, the way a woman keeps something she's not ready to put down, and not ready to carry anymore. $3.50. That was what my debt had come to in that final gap. Not in total. In total it was $62, which was a number I'd stopped being able to look at straight. But $3.50 was what she'd needed after everything else, the last shortfall between what she'd sold and what they were owed. And she'd taken the ring off the cord herself that morning, and walked up to Denton's porch and set it on his table without me knowing a thing about it until I heard the number and turned around and saw. I want to tell this right, so I'm going to back up some. My name is Tallbear. Not the name the soldiers use when they write things down. Those men gave me another name and I've carried it when I had to. But the name my mother gave me in the language she taught me, and the name my people used, and the name that fits. I was 43 years old that fall. I had been a chief of my band for 11 years, which sounds like a thing of weight and consequence. And it was, until the weight started carrying differently. We had lost the land 3 years before. Not in a fight, fights I understood. In paper. A treaty that none of us had signed the way we were told we'd signed it. And a surveyor A who drew a line that moved our boundary 14 miles east, and suddenly half the grazing land that had belonged to my people, since, before my grandfather's grandfathers could count it, was the property of a cattle syndicate out of St. Louis. We appealed. We rode to the agency. We waited. We waited the way you wait when you already know the answer, but you're not willing to let yourself know it yet, because knowing it means you have to decide what to do next, and the deciding is very heavy. And in the meantime, my people needed to eat. I borrowed from a man named Greer, who was a lender and a businessman, and was decent enough about it, meaning he gave me the time I asked for. Then from a freighter named Albrecht, who was less decent but willing. Then from the general store in Cutter's Fork, which was run by a woman named Clara Voss, who extended credit longer than she probably should have, and who I'll come to in time. The debts stack the way debts do, when the circumstances that cause them don't change, which is to say they stacked steadily and without much drama and with a kind of inevitability that I tried not to look at too directly. 3 of my men left during the second year to find wage work at the railroad camps to the south. 2 of them didn't come back, and I don't mean they died. I mean they found a life that didn't require waiting on paper decisions that came slow or didn't come at all, and I understood it. And I let them go without blame or reproach. But the leaving took something out of me that I didn't have a name for at the time, too. It wasn't anger. It was closer to the particular loneliness of a man who has been the center of something, and who watches the something get smaller, and who has to keep standing at the center anyway. Because there is no one else. By the second winter, I was running on what I can only call hollow pride. I held myself straight. I spoke for my people at the agency meetings in the language the officials used. Clearly and without anger, because anger gave them permission to dismiss you. And I had no interest in being dismissed. I made the decisions that needed making, and I made them with care. Maybe more care than I'd had in the good years, because when you're running on hollow, it takes more effort to stay upright than it did when you were full. But at night, in my own lodge, I knew what I was. A man who had borrowed against a future that was late in arriving. Clara Voss ran the store the way she did everything, which is to say efficiently and without ceremony, and without making anyone feel the absence of ceremony as a deficit. She was a widow. Thomas Voss had died of a chest wound the year before I arrived in Cutter's Fork, and she'd taken the store over from his estate, fixed, and made it into something better than it had been under him, from what I gathered. She had dark hair and capable hands, and a way of looking at things directly without turning it into a performance of directness, which is a distinction that matters and that not everyone manages. She extended the store credit again in the spring of the second year, without my asking for it, twice. I came in and explained the situation, and she listened to the whole thing, and then she opened the ledger and wrote the number down and pushed the goods across the counter. And that was that. No pity, no softening of the edges to make it easier for me to accept. Just the transaction, done the way it was worth doing. I could have accepted it with pity in it. I want to be clear about that. I'm not so proud that I'd turn down help when my people needed feeding. Shh. But the absence of pity made it possible for me to accept it with my head up. And that matters in ways that are hard to quantify, but that I have thought about many times since. I didn't understand Clara Voss then. I didn't try to. Didn't think of her as a person with depth that was worth examining. She was a creditor who was treating me fairly, and in that season, fair treatment was something I noticed and was grateful for, but didn't look past. I had enough to think about. The summer was hard and dry. The kind of summer that takes things from you that you didn't know you were holding until they're gone. We lost 2 horses to the heat, which hit me in the practical sense first. Horses are working animals, and their absence is a daily problem. And, in the other sense, the one where a man stands over a thing that has died in his care, and feels the specific weight of it, the accumulating heaviness of loss on loss. We lost an elder in July. Hawk Sitting had been with the band for 60 years, and who had the kind of presence that you don't notice, is holding things together until it's no longer. There I sat with him at the end and held his hand, and I thought about what it means to be responsible for people and unable to prevent certain things. It's not guilt, exactly. It's more like the awareness that the world does not always bend to the will of a man who has done everything right. And that awareness is something you either accept or it destroys you. And some days accepting it is harder than other days. Came for his money in August. He was civil about it. Greer was a businessman, not a brute, and brutalizing debtors doesn't serve a businessman's reputation. But he was clear. He'd given me 6 months and it was now 8, and he needed the principal back by September, or he'd involve his attorney. I told him I understood. I didn't tell him I'd obtained clear picture of where $62 was coming from, because the grazing land was still gone. And the harvest from the small plot we'd put in was poor, and the men who might have helped were gone. I rode back through Cutter's Fork that evening, and I stopped at the store for no particular reason, just to stand somewhere that wasn't my own lodge, where people were looking at me for answers I didn't have yet. Clara was stacking canned goods on the far shelf with her back to the door, and she said without turning around, "Greer came to see you." He did. He came here too. She set a can on the shelf and turned. He asked what I knew about your situation. I told him your credit was good in my store. That's generous of you, given the ledger. It's true, she said. Credit is a judgment about a man's character, not his current balance. I've never had reason to change my judgment. I didn't know what to do with that sentence. I thanked her in some way I don't remember clearly and left. And I thought about what she'd said for 3 days afterward, turning it over the way you turn over a thing that has more inside it than it showed you at first. September came. I'd managed to pull together $41. From the sale of 2 horses, some tools, and a rifle that had belonged to my father's brother, which I hated to sell and sold anyway. Because you sell what you have when you need to, and you don't make a monument out of the selling. $41 and a debt of $62 and an attorney's deadline and no further obvious moves. Clara Voss sent a boy to my camp with a note. It said, "I'd like to speak with you when you have a moment. No urgency." Shh. I rode in the next morning. She was in the back room of the store, going over her accounts at a small desk. She kept a lamp burning there, even in the mornings. Because the back room had one small window and not enough light, and there was something about that back room. The lamp, the ledgers, the iron box on the shelf, the smell of paper and lamp oil, and the slight dampness of old wood, that I came to associate over years with her specifically, the particular quality of her presence. She told me to sit. I sat. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said. "Not here to ask for more credit. I know you're not. I'm offering something different." She set her pencil down. "I have some savings. Not a great deal, but I think enough to bridge the difference. The $21 you're short. I'd like to loan it to you at no interest, to be repaid when you're able." I looked at her. "Why?" I said. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the ledger and then at me, and there was something in her face that I had to study for a moment, because I needed to know what it was. It wasn't pity. I could identify pity in most of its forms by that point. It wasn't charity the way some people dispense charity, the slight self-congratulation that can be hard to detect, but that I always detect. It was something plainer, a kind of clear-eyed regard. "Because you're a man who keeps his word," she said. "I've watched you for 2 years. You've paid what you could, when you could, without making excuses or asking for more time than you needed. You've kept your people fed on almost nothing, and I've watched you do it, and I respect it. That's the reason," I said. "Mrs. Voss, if I take your money and I can't pay it back, then I'll have made a misjudgment about character," she said, "and I'll deal with that. But I don't believe I have." I sat with it. The lamp flame moved in some draft from somewhere. Outside, I heard a wagon go by, and the driver's voice low and steady to his horses. "All right," I said. She got up and went to the iron box and counted the money out and set it in front of me. I took it. I thanked her. She told me not to thank her yet, to wait until the thing was settled. And there was a small dry humor in that. Not quite a smile, but close to it. And I thought, riding home, I have never known a woman who spoke exactly like this one. I paid Greer. I paid Albrecht. The attorney didn't come. The autumn was quiet in the way that follows a near disaster. Not peaceful exactly, but stabilized. The ordinary weight of things Binson's in place of the emergency was of not or Ted, which is its own kind of relief. I paid Clara back in installments through the winter and into the following spring. Each time I came in to make a payment, she'd write it in the ledger, and we'd talk for whatever time was reasonable. The agency news, the weather, a dispute she was having with a freighter over damaged goods, a dispute I was having with the agency official who kept scheduling meetings at times that required me to travel 2 days on short notice. She listened to the way a person listens when they're genuinely interested in what telling them, which is a different quality than performing interest, and rarer, and I had enough experience of performed interest by then to recognize the difference. By the time the loan was mostly repaid, I had started looking for reasons to come to the store that weren't payment-related. I know what I was doing when I did it. I'm not a man who pretends ignorance of his own behavior. I was looking for reasons to be in that back room with the one small window and the lamp, and this woman who spoke to me like a man she respected rather than a problem she was managing. I didn't know when it shifted for her, or whether it had. I knew when I first thought it might have, which was a day in early summer, when I came through the door with no clear errand, and she looked up from her desk and something in her face moved. A small thing, quick, and then covered. And I thought, I went home and thought about that for several days. We talked about everything else that summer. We talked about the land dispute. Now, in its 4th year, which I had learned to discuss without the desperation that used to leak into my voice when I thought of it, though the desperation was still there underneath. We talked about her store and the decisions she made about it, which interested me genuinely because she made them well. We talked about Thomas, which she'd never mentioned before. A careful man, she said. A good one. Who had died too young of a wound that shouldn't have killed him and did. And whom she still missed, in the specific way you miss someone you built a life with, which doesn't go away so much as settle in alongside everything else. She showed me the cord and the ring. Plain gold, she said. He'd had it made special, nothing fancy, just good metal in a good band, I said. He sounds like a man worth missing, she said. He was. I think you'd have liked him. And then we were quiet, and I let the quiet be. And we sat there in the back room in the late afternoon with the lamp beginning to matter, as the light outside started going, and it was the most comfortable silence I'd sat in. For a long time. The kind of silence that's only possible between people who don't feel the need, fill it. The debt crisis came back the following autumn, but this time it was the valleys. Not only mine. A bad season hit everyone. Prices low, a frost that came early and took crops. And 3 small ranchers went under, inside 6 weeks. A 4th was close. Clara's store lost accounts when men who owed her couldn't pay them. And I watched her absorb that, without complaint, and without changing how she ran things. Just recalculated and kept going. And then the agency manufactured a new claim against my band. Someone there. I never found out who exactly, though I have my beliefs. Decided that my band's account, which had been managed by the agency for 2 years, carried a discrepancy. They said we owed back fees for services rendered. The amount was $37. I knew the amount was fabricated. I also knew that fabricated amounts attached to official paper weigh the same as real ones in a formal proceeding, is the whole point of attaching them to official paper. I found out on a Tuesday. On Thursday I went to the agency and stated my position clearly, without anger, in the language the officials understood. Because I'd learned that anger gives such men permission to dismiss you. And I had never been willing to give them that permission. The official, a young man named Pierce, 6 months, in the post, listened to the whole thing and said the amount stood, and I had 30 days. I rode back through town and stopped at the store. She looked at my face when I came in. She said, "Sit down." I sat. I told her about the $37. She listened. "That's a manufactured debt," she said when I was done. "Yes. You still have to pay it or contest it, and wait a year." "Yes." She opened her books. She sat for a while doing arithmetic without speaking. "I have $18 I can spare right now," she said. "That gets you to 33. You need 4 more. I'll find the 4. She nodded. She went to the iron box. She counted the money and set it in front of me. I looked at it and then at her. "Clara," I said, just her name. I didn't have a sentence for the rest of it. She put her hand on mine on the table. Just for a moment. Her palm warm and dry and pressing down once, firmly, and then she took it back and pushed the money toward me. "Go on," she said. I got the $4 from a man in my band named Running Creek who had a small amount of cash put aside, for reasons he'd never explained, and handed it over without explanation or any drama about it. Just held it out and nodded once when I took it. I paid the agency. I got the receipt. I rode home and sat in my lodge for a long time not moving. I thought about what it meant to be helped by someone who asked nothing in return and made no ceremony of the helping. I thought about the hand on mine. I thought about the word, "Go on," said the way she said it. Not dismissing me, sending me out to do what needed doing because she trusted that I would do it. I thought about the ring on the cord. The next day I went back to the store. She was at the counter helping a woman choose between 2 bolts of fabric, and she looked over the woman's shoulder when I came through the door, and something in her face steadied. The way a face steadies when someone you expecting has arrived. And I waited while the woman made her choice and left. I put the agency receipt on the counter. She looked at it. "Good," she said. "I need to ask you something." She waited. "I need to ask you whether what I believe is happening between us is something you're aware of, and whether you have a view about it." She was quiet long enough that I thought I'd misjudged. Then she said, "I'm aware of it." And she looked at the receipt. Then at me. "I think you're the most capable and decent man I've known in a long time," she said. "And I think I've been finding reasons for you to come to the back room that weren't strictly necessary. And I think you know that." "I do." "Then I think we understand each other." She folded the receipt and handed it back to me and went back to her work. I stood there for a moment, and then I went home. And I felt something in my chest that I had not felt in a while. I'd have to count back several years, and the counting itself tells you something. We spent that winter in the careful way you spend a winter, when you've said one true thing to each other, and you're still learning what it means. I came to the store often. She came to my camp twice. The second time, for no reason, she stated, just arrived and looked around at everything with the same clear attentiveness she brought to everything, and sat outside my lodge with me and talked until the evening got cold. She asked me once what I'd lost in the last years. Not the land, she said. She knew about the land. The other losses. The ones that didn't go on paper. I thought about it, I said. A certain kind of certainty. The feeling of knowing the shape of what's coming and being able to trust it. She said she knew that feeling. She said when Thomas died, she'd had to learn to live in a present that didn't promise anything beyond itself. And it had taken her a long time, and she wasn't sure she'd finished. I said, "You seem like someone who finished." She said, "I seem that way because I've had practice, but at night, sometimes I'm still working on it." I understood that. I was still working on it too. What I didn't say, and what I've thought about since, is that sitting there outside my lodge in the cold, with this woman, I was working on it less than usual. The present was what it was, cold, quiet, her breath visible in the air, the camp settling into its evening sounds around us, and it wasn't asking to be anything else. That was new. I'd forgotten that feeling was available. In March, a man named Denton came to Cutter's Fork. A land speculator from Kansas City, clothes, and the specific confidence of a man who believed money resolves most problems he'll encounter. Inside 2 weeks, he'd bought the 2 ranches that had gone under and was working on a third. He came to the store and made Clara an offer on it. Not a bad offer in pure numbers. She told him it wasn't for sale. He came back with a better offer. She told him it still wasn't. He came a third time on a Saturday, and I was in the back room when I heard his voice at the counter. I came out. He looked at me the way some men do. The quick assessment, deciding whether to be polite or not, and settled on polite, barely. He made his case again. Clara listened to all of it with that straight look, and when he finished, she said, "Mr. Denton, I've told you twice this store is not for sale. I won't be saying it a third time, because there won't be a third time. Thank you for calling." He left. She watched the door close without moving. Then she looked at me, and there was a tired honesty in it, the specific tiredness of having to be very clear with someone and knowing the clarity will be tested again. "He'll be back," she said. "Probably. If he gets enough of the valley, it doesn't matter whether I sell or not." "He won't get everything," I said. "There are people here who won't be moved." She looked at me when I said that. "Are there?" she said, and it wasn't quite a question. "There are. I'm one." She held the look a moment. Then she went back to her ledger. April brought what April usually brought. Agency complications. A new boundary survey was being contested by the syndicate. The contest was technically in my favor. Treat meant it had entered the kind of limbo that officially favorable things enter when the opposition has lawyers and time. I spent a lot of April traveling to the agency, to the territorial office, once all the way to the capital, was 2 days each way, and cost money I didn't have in abundance. I paid for it by selling a horse I'd raised from a foal. The sale was the practical thing, and I did it without deliberating too much, because deliberating over practical necessities is a way of making yourself feel the loss twice. Once in the thinking, once in the doing, and I have never seen the advantage of that. Clara knew about the travel. When I came back, She said, "How did it go?" And I told her, "It went the way things go when they haven't gone anywhere yet, but haven't collapsed either." She said, "You'll get there," I said. "You can't know that," she said. "I know the kind of man who gets there, and you're him." She got up from the desk and poured me a cup of coffee from the pot she kept on the corner stove and set it in front of me without making anything of it. The way you do for someone whose presence in your room is simply correct. I wrapped my hands around the cup and felt the warmth come through and thought, this is one of the moments. The quiet ones. I've learned to notice them. The auction was in May. What Denton had done, and I understood it only afterward, when I could see it whole, was purchase the account that Greer had never properly closed. There had been a dispute between Greer and me about whether a payment I'd made in the second year had zeroed the balance or merely reduced it. I believed zeroed it. Greer believed otherwise. We'd argued once and then both let it sit because neither of us had the time or inclination to push it to a formal proceeding. I'd assumed the silence meant it was settled. I'd been wrong to assume that. Denton found the account on one of his surveys of local debt. He bought it from Greer for something less than face value. I don't know what he paid, and presented it as current and valid and moved against it with an attorney and a set of papers that were technically correct, even if the underlying claim was not. The amount in dispute was $19. I found out on Wednesday. The auction was scheduled for Friday. I had $9. I went to the store. I told Clara the whole thing. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Sit down," and I sat, and she went through her books for several minutes without speaking. She had $11 she could raise. She said, less than usual, because Denton's buying pressure had tightened her cash flow too. 11 and 9. 20. More than the 19, if it had been only the 19. But Denton's lawyer had attached fees, auction costs, administrative fees, and those pushed the total to $31. I had 9. She had 11. We were 11 short. She closed the ledger. She sat with her hands flat on the desk and was still. I watched her thinking, and I waited, because there was nothing else to do. Then she reached up and took the cord from around her neck. "Clara," I said, "the auction is tomorrow morning. Don't." She held the ring in her palm. Just looked at it for a moment, small and gold and plain, the thing she'd carried for 3 years. "It's metal," she said. "Thomas is not in this ring. He would tell me that himself if he could. You don't need to do this. Tall Bear." The way she said my name, quiet, clear, final. The way you say a name when you need someone to hear what's coming next. "Do you have something that changes the arithmetic?" I didn't. She went to Denton's auction the next morning with the ring. She sold it for $3.50. She came back with the money and combined it with what we had, and we paid the full amount before the auctioneer called the opening bid, and Denton's attorney had nothing to proceed against and left. I watched her standing on that porch with her arms folded, and her chin up and her neck bare where the cord had been. There are moments that you know, while they're happening, that you'll carry them your whole life. Not the dramatic ones necessarily, not the loudest. This one was quiet. A woman on a porch in the May morning, no ring, no cord, just her standing there with the transaction completed, and her bearing entirely unchanged. I have tried, since then, put into words what I felt looking at her. What I can say is this: she had not done it to be generous. She had not done it to earn something from me. She had not done it to make herself feel a certain way. She had done it because the arithmetic said she needed to, and because she had looked at the situation clearly and done the plain thing. That is the kind of person who does not come along often, and I had somehow crossed 4 years of debt and appeals and bad seasons and back rooms with lamps burning, ended up standing close enough to one to see her clearly. That evening I knocked on the back room door frame. She looked up. "Sit down," she said, which is what she always said, and I sat. The frog outside had started up. The creak behind the building. "The lamp," I said. "I want to tell you something straight." She waited. "What you did today," I said. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what that was. I know what you carried on that cord, and I know what it cost to put it on Denton's table. I won't let that be the last thing. You understand me?" She looked at me. Not past me, not at the desk, at me. "I understand you," she said. "I'm going to replace that ring," I said. "Not tomorrow. Not next month. But I'm going to. And when I do, I want to put it on your hand myself if you're willing." The frog outside went quiet. Started again. "I'm willing," she said. I had a ring made. It took time. Months of finding the right man, a silversmith 2 days south who came recommended, and then months of saving what the work would cost. And during all of those months, nothing between us was said about it again. Not because we'd forgotten, because it didn't need saying. Clara knew. I knew. That was enough to carry. I spent a winter thinking out the design. I am not an artist. I make no claims to that, but I knew what I wanted. A simple band, silver, with a pattern worked into it. Not ornate. Nothing for show. The pattern came from my people's tradition, but I didn't use it directly. I talked with an elder about what I had in mind, and she helped me adapt it into something that belonged to the two of us specifically. It took several conversations and several drawings on paper before she was satisfied with it. I was glad she was particular about it. Particular things are better than general ones. The silversmith made it twice. Taste. The first version was close, but the proportion of the pattern was off in a way that I couldn't name but could see. He saw it too, and he remade it without being asked twice and without charging me for the extra work which I respected. The second version was right. I carried it home in my breast pocket on the 2-day ride, and I could feel it there the whole way. Small, exact, finished. The afternoon I got back, I went to the store. Clara was at the counter with a young couple who were choosing kitchen implements, the serious kind of choosing that takes time. And she looked over the woman's shoulder when I came through the door, and something in her face did. What it did, the thing I'd been watching since the second winter, and never gotten tired of watching. And I waited while the couple made their decision and paid and went out. I set the ring on the counter between us. She went still. She looked at it without speaking. It caught the afternoon light coming through the window and held it. "Silver," I said. "The pattern is from my people's tradition. An elder helped me adapt it. She said this particular version means something close to the one who stays." I stopped. I thought that was right. Clara reached out and touched the ring with one finger, just traced the pattern slowly. "Tallbear," she said. "I know who you are," I said. "I've watched you 4 years and I know who you are. I'm asking you to know who I am and make your own judgment." She looked up from the ring. Her eyes were wet, held in, the way she held things, with effort that she didn't announce. "I know who you are," she said. "I've known since the second winter." Picked up the ring. I held it toward her. She put out her left hand and I slid the ring onto her finger. I had measured once, carefully. Without her knowing it, it fit. She looked at it on her hand. Then she came around the counter and she put her arms around me. Plainly, without ceremony, her face against my chest and her hands on my back. And I put my arms around her and held her. Outside, the street was going on. Horses and voices, and a hammer from somewhere up the road. The afternoon light through the store's windows was the yellow of a long August day, and it lay across the floor, and across her hair, and I felt the weight of her and the warmth of her, and the simple fact of her, standing here. I had been a chief when I had land and men and a future I could describe. I had been a chief when I had none of those things, which is the harder version, the one that shows you what you're made of. But I don't think I had understood, until that afternoon, what it felt like to be seen by someone who had watched you carefully and chosen you anyway. That's not a small thing. I want to say that plainly. Being valued by a good person who was not obligated to value you and who did it freely and clearly. That is not a small thing, and I will not pretend it is. I have been a chief. I have been responsible for people's lives. I have made difficult decisions in difficult conditions. and I have not always been wrong. I know what I'm worth, and I've known it most of my life. Knowing what you're worth and being known, those are different. A man can know his own value and still spend years in the hunger of it, wanting to be seen accurately by someone who matters. Clara Voss had seen me accurately from the beginning. She'd said it to Greer. His credit is good in my store. Before she'd said any of it to me, before I'd thought to wonder whether she saw me at all, she'd built the judgment quietly and held it steadily and never revised it. Standing in the store with her in my arms, I felt that. All of it at once, the years of it. I'm not a man who cries easily, and I didn't cry then, but I'll tell you it was close. We were married in October. Not a large ceremony. Neither of us had interest in large ceremonies. Or perhaps both of us had lived enough of our lives by then that we didn't need the performance of the event to make the event real. Clara's sister came down from the north. Two women from my band helped with the preparations. We held it at the store, because the store was your shows of it had happened. And Clara said she'd always wanted to get married somewhere she cared about. And she said it without sentimentality, just as a plain statement of preference. And I loved her for saying it that way. She wore the ring. She wore it on her finger, not on a cord. She wore it like it belonged there, which it did. The elder, who had helped me design it, came and said a blessing in Lakota. Clara listened to the whole thing without understanding the words. Her Lakota was minimal at that point, though she would learn some later. And her face showed that she understood what it meant to receive a thing that was given seriously, which is the deeper understanding. You can learn a language later. Understanding the weight of sincerity is something else. The agency dispute resolved in our favor 14 months after the wedding. Not fully, never fully, but enough. A new survey, an honest judge, territorial official, who was willing to read what the paper actually said instead of what the syndicate said. It said, we got back most of the eastern grazing, not the western acres, which are still a problem, and probably will be for a long time. But most of the east. That night after the ruling came through, I rode out to the eastern boundary and stood there in the late light, with the grass going in the wind, and I just stood there for a while. Not celebrating, marking it, feeling the land under the horse, and trying to take in the fact that it was ours, again in the way that paper recognizes, not only in the way we'd always known. Then I rode back. Clara was on the porch when I came in, reading. She looked up. She didn't ask how it went. She could tell by how I rode, she said later, though I still don't know exactly what she meant by that. She just set her book down, and I tied the horse and came up the steps and sat next to her in the other chair. And she reached over and put her hand on my forearm, just rested it there, and we sat until the light went. There have been other disputes since. There will be more. There are men who see this valley as a thing to be owned completely, and who find it difficult to reconcile themselves to the fact that there are people in it who won't be bought or moved. And those men tend to find legal and political and economic mechanisms to press on the problem, and pressing back requires attention and effort and time and money, and the particular stamina that comes from believing you're right and being willing to still be fighting in 10 years. I have that stamina. I intend to still be fighting in 10 years. That's not what I think about when I think about those years. When I think about them, I think about a back room with one small window. I think about a lamp burning in mid-morning. I think about a hand pressing down on mine once, firmly, and the word, "True, go on," said plainly. I think about a woman selling the last keepsake she carried close to her heart to close a gap in arithmetic. Not dramatically, not with any announcement of what she was doing. Just because the arithmetic said she needed to, and she was the kind of person who did what was needed without turning it into something to be credited for. I think about a ring on her finger now, silver, a pattern in it. That means be the one who stays. She is reading across the room from me as I'm telling you this. She reads every evening, and she reads with her whole face, a slight tension in her eyes, a stillness in her jaw. And I have been watching that face for years, and I have no interest in getting used to it. Psst. It still does the thing it does when she looks up and sees me looking at her. The thing she covers quickly, and almost succeeds in covering. And I let her, almost, succeed, because it pleases me that she still makes the effort after all this time, to be dignified about it. We have had a good life. We have had hard years in it. They're still having hard years. Any life does. But we have had a good one. What I mean by good is not easy. I mean, one in which the people beside me have been worth being beside, and the things I've fought for have been worth fighting for. And the man I've been, most of the time, is a man I can account for without flinching. And I mean one in which a woman saw me clearly when it would have been simpler not to look, and chose what she saw, and has been choosing it every day since. That is what I have to tell you. It is enough.